And I am delighted to say my guest here today is Paddy Monahan, who is running for the Seanad. Paddy, welcome to Clontarf Media.
Delighted to be here.
Paddy, tell us about you're a lawyer, and when the general election was announced and Jim O'Callaghan, not Jim Callaghan,
Yeah.
Jim O'Callaghan announced his candidacy, I had to write back to him and I said, Jim, isn't this exactly what Ireland needs? Another lawyer in Oireachtas, in Leinster House. So tell us, why are you as a lawyer running for the Seanad?
I'm actually more running for it as a dad than as a lawyer, to be honest. But having said that, now I wouldn't be. Lawyers can be a very diverse bunch anyway, and let's not forget the primary function of Parliament is to pass laws, is to legislate. Lawyers tend to be good at least at writing laws. Now, anyone can come up with the essence of a law, with what we need to. Laws are what govern our society, and I think lawyers are good at drafting those laws. But the moral impact behind those laws, anyone can push for that. So I think technically there's a help to being a lawyer in terms of understanding legislation. But anyway, look, I'll get back to the more important point here as a dad. Okay.
Okay.
So what I found out, my little boy now is 13 months old. I found out a little over a year ago that our local school is oversubscribed. And
where is that, Paddy?
Up in Raheny.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, and it was oversubscribed. What it is at the moment, I don't know. But the difficulty is, like 96% of schools in this country, that school is entitled to turn away children on the basis of religion once oversubscribed. Now, this is a taxpayer-funded school. This was a total eye-opener to me. Now, some people say that, well, your school might not be oversubscribed when the time comes, but I'm thinking, as a parent, as a taxpayer, why should I have to wonder whether or not my local school is oversubscribed, and why should my child be on a lower level? Why should my child be essentially facing discriminatory enrolment criteria in the local school? All the other kids from the road and from the area who are baptised will be going to that school, or at least will be in the top enrolment group for access to that school. So what I realised then was, I actually looked up the law book, and yeah, we have a law, section 73C of the Equal Status Act, which allows 96% of schools prioritise on the basis of religion once oversubscribed. So what I said was, well, that's mad law, that's crazy. Must be something that people have overlooked. I started a petition, this is again a long time ago, started a petition, gradually built up 20,000 signatures. I wrote articles in the Irish Times, in the Guardian, I was featured in the front page article in the New York Times, all to do with this law. So I built up a lot of interest around this law. But what amazed me was, despite the support of a lot of parents, there was political inertia. I was in and out of the Oireachtas on a weekly basis, meeting politicians. Predictably, some in the opposition supported. I can't say they all did. Fianna Fáil didn't support this change. So it got as far as a vote in the Dáil. It was debated for 90 minutes in December to repeal this law, to have equal school access for all children, regardless of religion, and it was defeated. The government parties voted it down. Shamefully, the then Labour Minister for Equality said that institutions for religious and charitable purposes have to be able to apply their religious rules as required. In other words, he was referring to schools as institutions for religious or charitable purposes. This is just December gone.
In many respects, Paddy, aren't you a victim of what I would call a hangover from the bad old days, the days of post-independence, where effectively we became a Catholic state by default. We became, and that is, the legislation was written on that basis, the Constitution was written on that basis, and what you're a victim of is the state subcontracting education out to a private entity.
The difficulty being, we're all paying for it. We pay 100% teacher salaries, school refurbishments, new school buildings, entirely paid for by the taxpayer. So, and I would like to. It's interesting to think that this is an old law. Again, like I said, I thought when I brought this to people's attention, it would be a matter of time before it's repealed. This isn't an old law. It was the year 2000. This law was introduced. So this was very deliberately introduced in recent years, and it hasn't been repealed. So. I'm not really interested in speculating as to why we have this law, as to what special interest groups wanted this law to begin with. It just strikes me as a blatantly unjust law. That's why I started my campaign. That's why I gathered 20,000 signatures. There's lots of other parents involved in this,
Okay.
lots of other interested parties, and that's one aspect of what I'm trying to achieve.
Something then that I'm not a lawyer, so I can't I can't comment on it, but I would certainly value your input in it, Paddy. Is that does that law then not conflict with the Equality Act, because you're clearly discriminating on the grounds of religion, which is one of the grounds that you're not supposed to do under the Equality Act.
There are nine grounds under which discrimination is prohibited, and the law does not conflict with that, because in the Equal Status Act 2000, what the Act says is it sets out the 9 grounds, race, gender, religion, and so on. So religion is one of those grounds. Generally speaking, there is a prohibition on discrimination on the basis of religion, but there's a specific exception under Section 7.3c of the Equal Status Act, so that schools may discriminate. And this is it says schools with a religious ethos. Technically, what it says is it is not discrimination. So it blatantly says black is white. It is not discrimination when schools with a certain ethos prioritise on the basis of religion in enrolment. However, in primary schools, 96% of schools fulfil that criterion. 96% of schools. So what we're really saying is virtually all schools are entitled to discriminate on the basis of religion. And what I say, another ground is race, obviously. Imagine we flipped that. Imagine we just said, listen, 96% of schools are entitled to discriminate on the basis of a child's skin colour in admissions. Look, it's okay, folks. We'll only use this when oversubscribed. So don't worry, we'll take everyone up to a certain point, but just when you're oversubscribed, then we'll impose this skin colour law. Needless to say, there'll be outrage. And listen, there's a reason why The Guardian, why news networks throughout the world, in Canada, the BBC state broadcaster, I did an interview with recently, a front page article in the New York Times, there's a reason why foreign countries are taking a huge interest in this, because to them they can see having this religious discrimination is just as egregious as a racial discrimination. But the fact is, in answer to your question, by law we've created a deliberate exemption for religion in schools.
I have to then come to what I would call the political legal question in that sense. If I go back to 2000, who was the president at the time? Mary McAleese?
Presumably,
yeah. Presumably Mary McAleese. This does not seem to have been referred to the Council of State. There doesn't seem to have been a High Court challenge on that. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, particularly the High Court challenge. I would have expected that somehow or other that we should at least put that to another authority and then go to Europe if necessary.
There are practical difficulties. First of all, needless to say, speaking as a dad, speaking as a citizen, speaking as someone who cares about democracy, it makes me, I hate to use such inflammatory language, but it actually makes me sick to think that the state will push parents to the degree of having to take a High Court challenge in order to get their child into the local school with other kids from the road. It turns my stomach that our politicians won't stand up and do something about it.
But they were doing that with autistic kids.
So forcing people to take a High Court challenge. The problem is, and I'm in a group, a brilliant group, Education Equality, which is parent-led. It's full of parents trying to change this law. The problem is, what tends to happen is, firstly, kids keep growing up. Kids need a school place. It's very hard. It's very difficult to get parents to stick with a legal case for the years and years and years that it will take when you're trying to find a school place for your child. And ultimately, the problem is, a school place will be found. It'll be found some distance from your home. All the other kids from the area, provided they're baptised, will be in top enrolment group in the local school. My friend Nikki Murphy, her child was turned away from 8 local schools. Now, I gather, I'm not sure, the woman is a hero to me. I'm not sure exactly what her situation is this year. This is last year. He missed out a year of schooling. Ultimately, that child, if he goes far enough away from his family home, he will find a school. So I'm talking about, in terms of practicality, it's very difficult to find people to hang on in there for a legal case, taking that legal case. Speaking of a constitutional challenge to it, well, the fact is, what the government have repeatedly said is they are advised by the Attorney General that this law is constitutionally acceptable. There's nothing to say it's constitutionally required, and you tell me if I'm becoming too legalistic. I'll try not to. We gather, because the Attorney General's advice isn't published, we gather that all of this revolves around freedom of religion. Now, first of all, I should say, I am not anti-anything. Most of my family are Catholic. A lot of them are practicing Catholics. Most of my nieces and nephews are baptised. And we all get on like a house on fire. I'm not being anti-anything. I'm talking about inclusiveness in our schools. Now, needless to say, if anyone threatened freedom of religion, I would be at the front of the protest. I would lead the protest with anyone else, because I think people should be free to practice their religion as they wish. However, in our state-funded institutions, I do not believe that state resources should be apportioned on the basis of the religion of our citizens. I think we're all equally entitled to those resources, including school places. As regards a challenge, or why there may not have been a challenge, or why the president why it wasn't challenged via the president, I gather the Attorney General has ruled that this is constitutionally acceptable. We think this, because this hasn't been published, we think this is under freedom of religion. However, the presumption there is the freedom of religion of an institution trumps the freedom of religion of an individual. So the freedom of religion of the institution, let's say the Catholic Church in these schools, trumps the freedom of religion of a parent and a child. Now, first of all, I'm not questioning the freedom of religion of the Catholic Church in its own institution, in the running of the church, but I'm talking about taxpayer-funded schools here. So we're saying that trumps, how the school is run by the church trumps the right of an individual parent or child to their freedom of religion. That's the assumption. But secondly, let's not forget, Article 44.2.3 of the Constitution, there shall be no religious discrimination there shall be no discrimination on the basis of religion. Full stop. There's another anti-discrimination clause in the Constitution, but it's qualified. This is the only unqualified anti-discrimination clause in the entire Constitution. There shall be no discrimination on the basis of religious status. Full stop. Now tell me, I'm baffled as to how the Attorney General does not see that as falling in favour of parents exercising their freedom of religion and exercising their right not to be discriminated against.
Can I put something then to you, Paddy? Is that we can isolate, or we can hone in on one officer of government, which is the Attorney General. But in a nutshell, really, aren't we here being critical of government not accepting its responsibility?
Absolutely, yes.
And my logic on this one, Paddy, is that my other half's Australian. In Australia, all state schools are secular. In other words, if you want to, by all means, have your religious schools, but they're private.
Yeah.
They're fee paying. We've done it the opposite, in that sense of the word, that effectively most state schools, the vast majority of state schools, are religious.
Indeed.
Despite the fact that I believe there's not many religious teaching in the schools anymore. So how do you justify an ethos other than the fact that you've got a contract?
Well, okay, so I've drafted legislation to deal with this. I've drafted legislation to deal with the Access Law, which is the Equal Status Act, to deal with the fact that teachers under Section 37 of the Employment Equality Act, teachers can still be preferred on the basis of religion.
Sure.
That, I would say that qualifications, skills and experience are all that matters in a teacher's CV, but they can still be preferred. Some people said to me, Paddy, nobody loses their job anymore over this, but you can have great difficulty getting a job if you don't have a certificate of religious qualification for a primary school. And also, I was contacted by innumerable teachers for my petition last year, and to a man and to a woman they said, we support you 100%, but we have to stay anonymous. Imagine just a teacher in a regular school having to stay anonymous for fear that they offend Section 37 of the Employment Equality Act. Finally, because I'm coming to your question now, and the third part of the legislation I've drafted simply moves the teaching of religion in primary schools to the last class of the school day to facilitate parents who don't want their kids taught religion. Obviously, a child in a classroom is going to absorb religion, whether they're sitting at the back of the class, and segregating them in class is a bad idea anyway. So I'm trying to come up with a practical solution, and that is to allow children to be removed from school before the last lesson of the day, which will be religion. Now, your question related to essentially secular schools. And a lot of people have said to me, they think I should be going further. They say, Paddy, we should have an entirely secular school system. Religion should be taught outside of schools. My answer to that is, it's not going to happen in my lifetime anyway. So I think we can dream, or we can focus on what's achievable. There's a lot of parents. My little fella, it so happens, is not baptised. Like I said, my nieces and nephews mostly are, and they're great, and they all get on very well. And I don't look at a kid, and I don't even consider their child, their religion, when I look at them. So, really what I'm saying is that we have to deal with what's possible. The fact is, 96% of schools have a religious ethos. The route taken by the Labour Party, Labour Party held the Education Ministry for the past 5 years. Labour had their biggest ever parliamentary presence in the past 5 years and had their biggest ever influence in government, and they held the Education Ministry for the entire time. Labour took the route that you were kind of discussing a moment ago, in that they tried to change the patronage of some schools. Now, they weren't looking for total secularisation, but they tried to change the patronage of some schools to increase the number of non-denominational schools. Out of 3,300 primary schools, Labour changed the patronage of 2 schools. 2 out of 3,300 went from being denominational to non-denominational in the past 5 years. So that'll show you the difficulty and the resistance to changing patronage. So I'm not trying to change patronage. What I'm saying is we have to deal with the fact that we have the system that we have. And I think I'm a prime example of a parent who, I want my child to be able to go to the local school. I want him to go to school with his friends from the road, with his friends from the area. And I'm not ashamed to say I want an accessible school nearby for him to go to. So living in the real world, I think repealing the law that allows schools to prefer children on the basis of religion has to be done. Same with the law that allows teachers to be preferred in their employment on the basis of religion, and then moving religion to the last class of the school day. I'm trying to come up with a compromise, a real world compromise that can deal with these things without offending anyone, certainly not offending the Constitution, and this requires no constitutional change whatsoever. So I understand when you mention secularisation and an entirely secular school system, but ultimately we have the system we have, and we've seen the difficulty in introducing change to the system that Labour endured in the last 5 years. So I'm saying let's deal with this in law, and let's remove the right for schools to prioritise on the basis of religion.
Do we come back down to it, Paddy, in the basis that in Ireland pretty much everything is available if you've got the money? You know, you've always been able to get divorced, you've always been able to have abortions. These days, if you've got the money, you can buy as much cocaine and use it as much as you like. When I was put in the situation where my daughter was, 12 or 13, and, you know, she went to one of the mixed schools, the one in, I think, out in Bayside. Won't have a problem with that at all. However, when it came to going to secondary school, she could have got into Mount Temple because she had automatic right because she was a non-Catholic, or an Anglican, whatever way we want to call it. But my view is that having been through that system, there was absolutely no way I was going to put her through that so-called national school system. And I just wonder, is there a contradiction to a degree in your argument, Paddy, is that even if you could get your child into those schools, why would you want to send them other than the convenience of locality?
Yeah. Okay. So in answer to that, there will be, if I succeed in getting this bill over the line, and trust me, it's going to be hard work doing that. If I succeed in getting this bill over the line, there will still be a significant number of parents who want their children to have an entirely non-religious education, and I think that's an absolute fundamental right of theirs to insist on that. So what we need to do is, we've got 2% non-religious schools, primary schools at the moment. A great organisation called Educate Together wants that to grow to about 10%, but I think it's by 2030. I don't want to speak for Educate Together. I think by 2030, so you'd be looking at about 300 schools rather than 70 odd would be non-religious by 2030. The idea, as far as I'm aware, that Educate Together have is that everyone should have, within maximum half an hour of their house, should have access to a non-religious school. And I think that is very, very noble. And that, I think it is very important that parents who want non-religious education for their children should be able to access that. But I do think, and I'm not ashamed to say, there are other factors that, and I'm one of those parents, that some parents want. To me, my child, I don't know whether they could access a non-religious school within half an hour, but there's a perfectly good school, 2-minute walk away, where all the kids from the area tend to go. My little fella's friends from the road will be going to that school. The people he grows up with, Raheny GAA club will be joining. I'm a Clontarf man myself, but it's killing me to have to join Raheny now that I'm living there. I think that there are plenty of other factors that a parent, not everybody who doesn't baptise their child necessarily wants to send their child to a non-religious school, or will necessarily want to go to the trouble of going out of their way to it. There are good reasons to do that, but I just think proximity is important, locality is important, friends, going to school with your friends from the area, these are other reasons. Any parent, and it happens to be a very good school. Now the question is, if it was doused in religion, if this school was absolutely replete with religion at every turn, well then that would certainly affect my feelings about the school. However, as you mentioned earlier on in this conversation, the fact is most schools, they're religious in name, but most teachers, I think, have a very, very sensible approach to it. I'm just talking about legislating for this, and I am talking about legislating so that religion becomes a discrete lesson in all of these schools at the end of the day, so that religion does not permeate the entire school day. Religion is the last class of the day, and then that'll satisfy parents who want their children to still have a religious education. Parents who want to remove their children from that school may do so. Parents who need a non-religious school should have access to that school. And ultimately, what I'm talking about is dealing with the situation that we have, which is 96% religious schools. You know, I suppose we're talking about a metaphorical atom bomb to completely change to a secular system, and I just don't see. I don't see even the point in having a conversation about it, because it's not going to happen.
Okay, can I put something to you, Paddy? And this is based on people I have spoken to. If you have a look historically, and people I've spoken to from the Jewish community, when they came here and they were getting educated in the 20s and 30s and things like that, there were no Jewish schools. If you like, the better off went to Anglican schools, and the less well off tended to go to Christian Brothers. And a couple of people I was speaking to, I said, how did that work out? And they said, oh well, when they got to the religious stage, we went elsewhere, and they had their Jewish education at home and through other means. It just struck me, listening to yourself, is that perhaps this is not there to penalise your child. It's there to penalise you. In other words, they seem to be much better at dealing with making allowances, shall we say, for children whose parents were non-Catholic, as opposed to children whose parents were maybe lapsed Catholics, or, dare I say it, objective Catholics. How do you feel about that?
Well, as a potential future politician, I'm wary of weighing in too hard on any issue of conjecture, really, because the fact is, look, I'm not comfortable talking about the church, because I don't understand the church as a kind of, looking at it as a monolithic single view organisation. I don't understand it, because when I hear the likes of Peter McVerry speak, all I can say is what he said. I have very little to add on any topic, but even on school access, there's very little I can add to what the likes of Father Peter McVerry say, because he believes that he would take it further than me. He would take religion out of schools entirely. But look, he's got a very, very sensible approach to religion in schools, and whether or not it's there to punish people who may or may not be lapsed Catholics, what I think is that I think there is a way to work with the system that we have, to make it inclusive, so that kids from all backgrounds can enjoy their school, can learn in their school, and not feel isolated in their school. Because as things are, there is a constitutional right to remove your child from religion in any school in the country. That's a constitutional right. However, in most schools, the fact is, and the teachers mean very well and they do their best, but in most schools what that means is the kids who don't want to receive religion, they sit at the back of the class, they're given busy work to do because they can't get ahead with their curriculum work, and then the other children go to a different section of the classroom and they have their religion class. Now, first of all, that's clearly segregation within the classroom. It's just not, I'm not saying it's going to scar a child for life, but listen, clearly it's not a good thing to have children separated in the classroom because you're from one background and the rest of us are from another background. I think having that time at, whatever it is, 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock, when children can be taken home for the rest of the day and the rest of the kids can stay there, it's the most sensible way of dealing with it, given the system that we have. I think that the system can be improved greatly. I think that we can keep the patronage. Schools can keep their ethos. They can continue to teach religion, but they can just do a little bit more to help integrate children from different backgrounds into their schools. And what I'm trying to do is pass legislation so that will be the case. That's the legislation that I've drafted. So to repeat the legislation, I've called it the Equality in Schools Bill. Equal school access for kids from all backgrounds, employment equality for teachers regardless of the religious background of the teacher, and equal respect for all children, meaning moving religion to the last class of the school day so that kids aren't separated during the school day in class. And that's the education aspect of my essentially my policy for the Seanad.
So how do you get around what we had? When we get teachers praying for rain, or praying for sunshine for a football game, and when we get to the geography, well, it tend to be a lot of basilicas and a whole range of things like that. And then when we got to history, it was something else. Isn't that a problem?
Yeah.
That we're always going to get this hedge until we get to secularization. We are always going to get this hegemonistic approach to culture. In other words, your kid's probably going to play GAA, even if you wanted him to play rugby. He's probably going to get to speak Irish, whether you wanted that or not. There was, and it's still being taken time to be diluted, my experience, that there was this view that Irishness revolved around Catholic GAA and Irish speaking. Don't Are you saying that really that idea has passed its sell-by date?
I think in some ways, I think Ireland is a great country, and I think that there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we can do to make it better. I mean, two out of the three things you say, I'm mad about the Irish language, and I absolutely think the GAA is the greatest organisation on planet Earth. I think it's amazing, but I think that I think there's great aspects to Irish culture, and there's great aspects to the country's cultures generally. But I think, look, a lot of this, it just takes time to bed in, and sometimes it has to be led by legislation. For example, I think the marriage equality referendum last year, I think it probably, I hope I had woken up decades ago, but I think it helped other people to wake up to the fact that, you know, we are an increasingly diverse society, and it's not good enough just to say is we've always done it this way, row in, you know, homogenize or get lost. And I think there are great things that we have to keep. The GAA, for example, is something we have to keep, and we have to get kids from all different backgrounds, and they are already playing in the GAA. The Irish language, kids from all different backgrounds speaking the Irish language is brilliant. In my opinion, conforming to a religious stereotype, conforming to a religious single status in the country is absolutely not a good thing, and there's no reason why that should happen. And primarily, coming at this as a lawyer, we have a law that exists solely to do that. It exists solely to segregate children on the basis of religion. So there are great things about Ireland. I suppose what I'm saying is, look, 20 years ago, people didn't think so much about using homophobic language. I think they might have in the pub dropped it into a conversation. I think now people are a bit stronger, first of all, you'll hear a lot less of it, and secondly, people feel a lot easier standing up and say, hold on a second, my brother's gay or my sister's gay. You know, people feel it's just not acceptable to do that anymore. And I think people don't realise that it's just, frankly, I'm going to be blunt here, it is just not normal to have kids segregated in our schools on the basis of religion. It is not normal to have religion class at 11 or half 11 during the school day in 96% of taxpayer funded schools, and expect kids kind of with a smile on their face who happen to be from different backgrounds to go, well, they've taken us in, we've been accepted. So I think people will realise, maybe not overnight, but we need legislation to lead the way to think, really, we don't all have to, it's not normal to expect people to conform. In our education system, you know, we'll be teaching the 3 R's, we'll be teaching the major subjects, we'll be teaching PE and music and so on, but to expect people to conform under an umbrella of religion is not acceptable, not normal. I think it's increasingly becoming the case people realise that. Yeah.
Just something then, Paddy, that struck me listening to you there. Schools, what are called national schools and what are called Catholic schools, irrespective, they tend to be run by boards of management. Can that board, I mean, okay, I'm told that a lot of them still have a cleric as the chair or whatever, but can that board of management not in itself become more democratic? Is that not the way as well to focus it and say, look guys, you know, we agree with Paddy, as a school, we're going to do this, and you know, and I know it's a piecemeal approach.
And some do. It is you're correct. It's a piecemeal approach, but you have to say it because the fact is, 96%, I've said it before, taxpayer-funded schools are entitled to apply this law, this discriminatory enrolment law. Not all do. Now, however, it's important to stress the vast, vast, vast majority do. It is a tiny minority of schools with a religious ethos that don't have this in their enrolment policy. And problematically, should the school ever be oversubscribed, there's nothing to stop them changing their enrolment policy. Thirdly, and you raise a very important point, because the point is, this law does not make it obligatory to turn away children. There's nothing making schools do this. The vast majority of schools have chosen to have this as an enrolment policy. Therefore, that's why I say it's well and good to take the piecemeal approach, the nicely, softly approach, but ultimately I think we have to legislate for this, because as we saw when Labour tried to change patronage, it will take eons if we try to do it piecemeal. And the fact is,
not aeons.
Aeon, indeed. The fact is, it's a rotten, discriminatory piece of law that we have, and by any perspective, it just needs to be changed. Full stop. It needs to be changed. And what I was getting at earlier was, and I think people will realise, when the next generation, when kids who are now 10, 15, 20 years of age, in 20 years' time, when they're 30 to 40 years of age, they'll be going, hold on a second, you had a law, and nobody did anything about it. You had this law that allowed schools to turn kids away. I keep hearing, apparently the latest from the Irish Catholic newspaper, I don't know where they got, I've no idea what their source is for this. They say only 1.5% of schools are oversubscribed. Now, trust me, well over 90% have this in their enrollment criteria, but only 1.5% are applying it, as if that's a good thing. My answer to that is, well, the ESRI in its most recent figures from a few years ago said 20% are oversubscribed. The Education Committee in the Oireachtas used those figures of 20% much more recently. However, yes, from some source that the Irish Catholic newspaper has, they say 1.5%. What I would say to that is, if 1.5% of schools were turning away children because they're the wrong skin colour, I think we'd still have a pretty huge issue with that. Yeah. Now, I think newspapers like the Irish Catholic need to come to a decision. Is this right or is it wrong? If it's okay, if it's right, then why focus on the small percentage? Surely if you believe it's right to segregate and discriminate against children on the basis of religion in taxpayer-funded schools, why would you come up with a percentage to say, look, it's only a small number? And if you're using that percentage, on the other hand, if they're using that percentage to say, well, actually, look, it's only a small number are affected, so it's not that big a deal, I would say, well, what you're saying then is this is wrong, but only a small number are affected. So similarly, it's the number of children affected is irrelevant. The fact is, and by the way, I can name, if you go to Education Equality's website, educationequality.ie, you'll see lots and lots of parents who have told their own stories of discrimination. You'll hear the likes of Rupesh Panikkar, whose child was turned away from all the schools in her area. All she ever said was, "Daddy, why can't I go to school with my friends from creche?" Yeah. She did. She got a school place, of course she did, half an hour away. Yeah. Nikki Murphy, who's fighting still for a school place for her child, again, hopefully he will be offered a school place somewhere, but he was turned away from 8 schools last year because he wasn't the right religion. Mm. How many parents have to go through this? And then finally there's the issue of duress and coercion. There's the unspoken aspect of people getting their children baptised because they know that it will benefit their children. There's a distinct educational advantage, frankly. And I'm not having a pop with the Catholic Church at all. All I'm saying is they're over 90% of schools, so the other 6% being more small minority religions. There's a distinct educational advantage to having your child baptised. That's the bottom line. And that's a bad thing in a democracy.
Okay. Last but by no means least, Paddy, one of your issues for the Seanad that you're talking, that you're hoping to highlight is issues of healthcare. Yeah. In my day, all the hospitals were based on religion. You know, we had, the Rotunda was a Protestant hospital, the Adelaide was a Protestant, I think Patrick Dunn's was Protestant, and then there was other Catholic ones as well. Particularly the nuns, they would say, once you took us out of the hospitals, look what's happened. They've all gone downhill. Couldn't they use that argument about the schools as well? No,
and they'd be wrong in case of my legislation. I can explain why. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not talking about changing the patronage. I'm not talking about changing the ownership, and I'm not talking about removing religion from school. Mm-hmm. I'm just talking about making them inclusive. And using your analogy with the hospital, how about this for an analogy? How about we apply the same legislation that currently applies to schools? Why don't we try applying that to hospitals, whereby we have a hospital waiting room? Now, the hospital waiting room is empty. Come on in, we'll take anyone. Come on in, you're all welcome. Let's imagine the hospital waiting room is busy. Okay, folks, we're going to be working. The way we're going to work this is you all take a number, but Catholics take the number first. Okay, only then when Catholics are dealt with, then we'll take anyone else. Imagine you're waiting with your child to be dealt with, who happens not to be baptised, and then your child's about to be dealt with the injury or illness that they have. Oh no, sorry, another Catholic just came in. You're going to have to wait for this person to be dealt with, despite the fact you've been waiting for hours. It's ludicrous. In a taxpayer-funded hospital, it's madness to apply that. So what I would say is, in answer to your question, number one, I'm not talking about changing the ethos or the ownership of the school, so the school wouldn't have to worry about that. Number two, I think I've outlined, by applying to hospitals, I've outlined how egregious the discrimination is and how egregious the legislation is. And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned healthcare, because obviously for your listeners, for anyone who's tuning into this, it's important to stress that I'm not a single issue candidate. I think education generally, I qualified as a primary teacher in 2003, I'm now a barrister. I think education is vitally important. I think early years, early intervention is vitally important. This is the issue I've been campaigning for a long time, so that's why I've prioritised this, and it is my number one priority, is to change this legislation. But healthcare, primary healthcare, less. I think education has a huge part to play in healthcare as well. You know, education regarding obesity, regarding eating, regarding our lifestyle habits. Education can have such an effect in so many areas that I think basically it's what you're talking about is joined up thinking here. Yeah.
Paddy, you've got some interesting things to say about Seanad Reform, transport, and we would love to talk to you about them, but unfortunately
You're
we've run
very
out of
good.
time. But
Well, you're very good to
best
give
of
me
luck for the
time. Thanks a lot.
Seanad, and as I say, we need people who are courageous, and we need people who are original thinkers, and you certainly are.
Do my best.
Paddy
Thanks
Monahan,
very much
thanks
indeed.
for your time.
Gotta get up, gotta get up, gotta get up. Oh, oh. Gotta get up, gotta